Welcome, everyone. And continuing with the theory and practice of universal ethics, the Noahide laws, by Rabbi Dr. Shimon Dovid Cowen of Australia. We are currently up to page 105 for those of you that have your own copy, chapter 5. We may be able to get, I'm being a little bit too optimistic. Okay, we'll get as far as we can get, and then we'll be able to open up for discussion as usual. For a change, we're going to be discussing a little bit of the American society and law as opposed to the Australian one, but it's universal and it applies all over. So we're going to begin now, and it's self-explanatory. There's an overview, so therefore I need not give any introduction. Let's read it inside. Chapter 5, again, page 105. Politics, states, world society, and the Noahide laws. Overview. Within the state, the Noahide laws resolve the relation of religion and state, private morality in matters between the person and God, and public morality between persons, differently to the way existing advanced societies have tended to detach the two realms and marginalize the realm of personal morality. The authority and guidance for laws between persons ultimately comes from the realm of personal belief and morality. And certainly the state may not legislate in a way to undermine society's own moral and spiritual foundations. Thus, it is explained that the plurality or neutrality of the American state, for example, when it functions authentically, works not to exclude religion, but to maintain the common denominator spirituality of American society, non-denominational, but scrupulously monotheistic, which has the fundamental affinity with the basis of the Noahide laws. So that's good. That's really the way it's supposed to be, and that's the basis for it. As the common spiritual roots of the world religions, and hence of cultures and states, the Noahide laws form a basis for peace and order in world society. Since the palpable reality of world society is that of conflicting cultures and independent sovereign states, regulation can stem only from rules which have a common authority and also subject the private lives of nations to moral scrutiny. The land of Israel, as seen in current conflicts, is particularly central to world peace. Now remember, this was written before this year. Surely we can say how much more so in the current situation that we've been in now for the past about 6 months or so. Within the framework of the Noahide laws, 3 fundamental concepts are here clarified. The special status of the Jewish possession of the land of Israel couldn't be more appropriate and timely than now. Our coexistence of other communities and individuals is possible within the land of Israel. It's another whole discussion. In other words, can non-Jewish people live in Israel? And what does that mean? And how is it supposed to look like? And why world peace in general is intimately associated with security of Israel. Like, isn't Israel just this tiny, tiny little country in the Middle East? And why does that affect the international picture? All right. Page 106. 1. National societies and the Noahide laws. the unity of public and private morality. The Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments, given at Mount Sinai, has been commonly understood to form the basis of society at large. So, and actually, we'll get to it, but many people make the mistake, and they think, I hear this all too often, it's not terrible, but just for the sake of accuracy, they say, yes, everybody has to keep the Ten Commandments, and if everybody would keep the Ten Commandments, it would be a better world, and they always talk about Ten Commandments for the world. That's not accurate, because there's 7 commandments with all that they include and branch out, and they can end up being many, many more. But the basic ones for the world, of course, as we know, are the 7 that we're discussing and learning the whole time. And the reason I say not the 10, even though some of them overlap, is, for instance, one of the 10 is keeping the Shabbos. And we know that a non-Jew is forbidden to keep Shabbos. So there you see that the 10 are not the ones that are for the world at large, but it's just not technically accurate, but it is the form, they are the form, the basis of society at large. This is certainly true in the sense that the foundation of society, the Noahide laws, talking about the 7, not the 10 commandments, forms part of the general revelation to humanity at Sinai, at which the 10 commandments were given. Moreover, the 10 commandments largely overlap the Noahide laws and have been understood also specifically to intimate the content of the 7 Noahide laws. Although differences, such as, for example, in the observance of Sabbath, must be understood. But otherwise, it's okay to say that the 10 commandments are the basis and the foundation for society. The division found in the Noahide laws, as in the 10 commandments themselves, between commandments in the relationship of persons to God and in the relationships of people to each other, in the context of the state, becomes the issue of private and public morality, religion, and state. Whilst all precepts, both those between persons and those between persons and God, originate in religious values from God, the province of the state is largely assumed to be that of interpersonal precepts, whilst religion is grasped as the circumambient domain of the precepts between persons and God. So that's the split that many people make. This obscures the real inseparability of laws relating to private morality, meaning between the human and God, and those between person and person. Most pointedly, this means that personal morality, including sexual morality, becomes a concern for legislation, whether in regards to what it does or fails to do. This is a delicate realm calling for sensitivity in positive action. But irrespective of whether and to what extent government can do something about it, before God, there is no distinction between the private and the public, between morality and law. That's very important. So the whole approach is off. He's going to explain about the separation of religion and state. So that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not like, well, religion is for the way I behave and I act and I interact or with God. But as far as state is concerned, that's between man and man. That's a mistake, because God is the one who tells us how to behave and interact with other people as well. The integral relationship of the private realm between the person and God with the public realm between persons is borne out from a number of perspectives. Thus, it is explained that the prohibition of idolatry, commandment in the personal realm, is primary among the Noahide laws. it represents the acceptance of the king, God, upon which is predicated the acceptance of the king's decree, the remaining Noahide laws. All right, we have the idea that before one accepts the decrees of the king, he needs to accept that he is in fact the king. So the first, most basic thing is accepting that God Almighty is the creator and is the one who gave us the laws, and he is the only one, and there is no other deity. So that would be, in that order, the seven Noahide commandments. That means that Avodah Zarah, the prohibition of idolatry, is number one. After that, now you accept all of his decrees, all the laws. Whilst the prohibition on blasphemy would appear closely related to the prohibition on idolatry, both of them in the personal realm, it's all between you and God, it is harder at first glance to see how laws bearing on sexual relationships have to do with one's relation to God. I mean, after all, that seems to be just between two people. One answer to this would seem to be that it has to do, in a very basic sense, with the assertion of the spiritual over the physical in a human being. A purity of private life is also part of the general attunement to God required by the private Noahide commandments, from which fulfillment of commandments in the public interpersonal realm obtains its authority and force. Indeed, divine lawfulness is first authentically accepted in the personal realm. So that's one approach. That don't tell me that the laws, that the religion is only between man and God, but not between two individuals. No, because the whole basis has to be that it's all based on religion, spirituality. Secondly, divine lawfulness needs to be extended from the personal realm to the realm between persons. Even in the manifestly rational laws, such as the prohibition of theft and murder, gray areas abound. Outright killing, no one would support. But what of assisted suicide, euthanasia, etc.? Stealing money is prohibited. What about forms of psychological deception and manipulation, called in the tradition from Sinai the stealing of understanding, gnevas das, in the rabbinic literature, stealing of understanding. Practice in the marketplace. I mean, that's unfortunately done all the time. So even though the rational laws, they're rational, and no normal, intelligent, doesn't have to be intelligent, I take that back, no normal, healthy human being has a problem with them. But that's just the very basic thing, like don't kill and don't steal. But what about going into the details? What's really, in this case, that stealing? In this case, that killing? So there, it already is not so clear. A legal system is one of the precepts of the Noahide laws, obviously operating in the realm between persons. But what of the technical protraction of proceedings so as to favor wealthier clients? What do you do in that case? The Noahide laws can illuminate all these darker areas in the realm of interpersonal precepts only by virtue of the integrity of personal belief and morality, where there is a willingness to accept divine commands, a divine will, rather than following the vagaries of untutored reason. So even in those laws where no argument, you can't kill, you can't steal, even there, the only way that you can actually have a proper court system and fulfill that law of having courts of law and all that is only if it all is based on what we're calling private, the idea of the belief and the acceptance of God's laws. It should be noted that those societies which have most resiliently remained decent societies in the public realm which have not succumbed to despotism and terror are those which acknowledged the biblical, Sinaitic source of the Noahide laws themselves. Okay, he's stating that as a fact. You could see footnote 5. So this is factual things. Such is American society, which, as noted, congressionally endorsed the Noahide laws in 1991. That is a very big deal. You know, some people, they play it down. They say, "Oh, that's nothing. There's so many of these things, and it's just signed, and it's just not even a political thing." It's no, it means a lot, and it is. They endorsed it. It is one of the most religious nations on earth, the United States of America, in terms of the percentage of the population professing in belief in one God. On its currency are written the words, "In God we trust," and the explicit moralism of American politics extends, notwithstanding certain historical isolationist episodes, to its relationship to the world society. Marxists and other materialistically minded critics might view the motives of Americans much more skeptically, as being driven by material interests. But then again, it was Karl Marx and those other critics who sought to remove God and the soul from human discourse. So we basically don't accept his opinion. We don't really care. Yes, we're not saying everybody is very righteous. We're not saying that people are on the highest moral levels and on the highest religion level. We get that. You know, and all the jokes, you know, they say, in God we trust, all others pay cash. You know, there are lots and lots of jokes. Fact is that for those of us that are United States citizens, those of us that are American citizens, we should be proud. And there's a lot of complaints. That's fine. And there's a lot that we can play down, as is the case in most all countries. But the founding fathers, the basis of this country for 250 years, and the fact is that on all currency, every bill, every coin, it says these words, "In God we trust." That is something amazing. And as a matter of fact, the Rabbi Melech HaMashiach has spoken about this on a number of occasions, and he even points out the choice of words. It doesn't just say, "In God we believe," which would also be amazing and wonderful. It says trust. Trust is a higher level than just believe. Trust means you're actually living, and your mindset is a certain thing, and you're trusting in Hashem, in God. And that's better than just believing. So that's really great, and doesn't matter that many people could care less. It's just what the money says. It's showing you the core of the government and what the country really is all about, at least in theory. The meaning of the separation of religion and state. Okay? And this, there has been much discussed about this, debated about this, written about this. The First Amendment of the American Constitution provides that the state shall not establish any one religion. Which again, stop right there. That's beautiful. You're going to tell me, well, the founding fathers were Christians. It doesn't mention JC on the money. It says capital G-O-D. And when they made the Constitution, clearly they say that it's not going to establish any one religion. There has been much interpretation of the meaning of this separation of religion and state. One extreme interpretation of it is that the state must exclude religion from the public sphere, including state educational institutions. In other words, don't mention any religion, don't mention God in any way, shape, or form. That's one extreme of how they interpret that. There's an opposite, and from the stance of the tradition from Sinai, authentic view. What's the right view? That the state must do nothing to obstruct, i.e., to interfere with or delimit free religious observance. Thus, in regard to the moment of prayer in public schools, there were those who wanted to use the First Amendment to exclude it, and those who argued in a manner consistent with Noahide belief that the state is forbidden by the First Amendment to obstruct it. Not only is it okay, but you're not allowed to take it out. Primary instances where the controversy of state and religion has come up are in the area of contemplated legislation relating to sexual morality in issues such as ordaining the civil marriage of homosexuals, and in the display of religious symbols such as the Ten Commandments in courthouses, or in the provision for a moment of silence and the possibility of prayer in public schools. Okay, so that's where a lot of people are against all of those things, and they use the First Amendment. Now, from the standpoint of the Noahide laws, homosexuality is divinely prohibited, and the biblical sources of this prohibition are clear. So also, idolatry and blasphemy are wrong, and their contraries, belief in and reverence for God, are good. Yet, today, when the spiritual has been at least partially eclipsed, where people do not sense the deficit in transgressing, or even clearly grasp the idea of laws between the person and God. The very least a society working its way towards a Noahide ideal can do is not to institutionalize and legitimate these acts. For whether by intention or default, whether for good or for bad, the state is a moral educator. There are two ways in which the state, aside from criminalizing immoral behavior, can actually become a force in influencing personal morality, when supposedly it is merely impartially protecting the liberty and plurality of the marketplace of ideas. One is by omission or permission, and the other is by commission. In the realm of interpersonal offenses, such as stealing or acts of violence against other people, the law forbids and punishes. Even in purely regulatory areas, such as traffic laws, there are punishments, fines, loss of license, and so forth, for transgressions much smaller than manslaughter, such as speeding, parking infringements, and so forth. Ignorance of the laws which prohibit all these interpersonal offenses is no excuse, for one is bound to know the law. It is a matter of responsibility. The state does not leave this to some supposed innate or even learned sense of responsibility. It punishes for transgression, and people are aware of the punishment. When a new regulation is introduced, such as a change in the speed limit in built-up areas, there will be a public education campaign as to the impending change of rules, and it is followed and backed up by penalties, which are announced and implemented. So they do their job. In short, just as the education of a child is accompanied with punishment or the threat of punishment, so too society educates together with punishment. At this elementary level, what is not punished or enforced is implicitly permitted, except for individuals of high refinement. A gentleman's word may for him and other gentlemen have the force of a contract, but society generally prefers a legal contract. The same goes for civil law. Even though punishments may not initially apply, civil remedies of courts can be backed up with punishment when their breach is considered contempt of court. So, whilst we cannot here speak of punishment directly, as in the realm of criminal law, disobedience of a civil law ruling becomes a criminal offense. And so, indirectly, punishment comes in here also to reinforce the social values enshrined in law. The state may, by not punishing an act which Noahide law forbids, permit it. Just because they don't punish it and there's no consequence legally, they are permitting it. By not punishing conduct, the state is not actively condoning it, but by allowing it to prevail, it could be functioning to educate passively. The society might no longer penalize adultery by dropping the concept of fault or other grounds in divorce. But the net result is that it destigmatizes adultery. And destigmatizes, sorry. Right, it destigmatizes adultery. And even if fidelity is the socially preferred value, the state has passively educated a new attitude towards adultery. It becomes less wrong. But it is not with this omission or permission that we want presently to take issue, rather with aspects of the state's active education in values. That's what we're going to address now. Thus, where the state takes measures to secularize education, which has traditionally preserved the space for spiritual values, by now excluding the moment of silence, it has become an active educator in the moral realm against religion. Such would also be the case for homosexual marriage to be instituted similar to heterosexual marriage. The state would then be educating a generation in the equal normatives of heterosexual and homosexual relationships, something clearly denied by Noahide law and traditional religious values. Would the polymorphous sexuality of young teenagers then be led, socialized in significant percentages in the direction of homosexual relationships, when no one, including a parent, can any longer authoritatively argue that heterosexuality is normative? A story appeared in the press alleging the following: that in Germany, prostitution has been fully legitimated as a form of work and is registered with employment agencies. All right, so when she goes to work, no problem. This is an honest living. The German law, it stated, is that social security benefits are linked to efforts to find employment. A woman who was seeking employment and had indicated that she was willing to work in a bar was offered a job in a brothel. Since she declined this job and had no other, her social security payments were substantially cut for refusing to accept employment in a legitimate job, vis-a-vis as a prostitute. In such a scenario, the state has not simply permitted prostitution, but institutionalized it. That's beyond atrocious. If the state, by disallowing a moment of prayer in public schools or contemplating the institutionalization of homosexual marriage, is concerned for the rights of an autistic minority or for those who want the homosexual option, why does it not provide for the rights of the minority, which would benefit from total, I'm not sure this expression here.
You say fair?
Which means? Dealing?
No, free market without any restrictions.
Laissez-faire economics. It has a sense of material harm, but no, or at least a much weaker sense of spiritual harm. Should the state be entitled to institutionalize values which go against and harm the ethos of the majority in the moral sphere, whilst in the material sphere, it would feel constrained to act in accordance with the ethos of the majority and disregard minority views and interests? The Noahide position requires the protection and certainly not the infringement of the moral and spiritual values of society. Let's do the next piece. The American civil religion, ethical monotheism. What to pursue the American example is the moral tradition of society. The statement by Justice Douglas, representing the ruling of the Supreme Court of the United States in the case Zorach versus Clausen, 1952, was that we are a religious people whose institutions presuppose a supreme being. How do you like that? That's a ruling that the judge gave. And that the state properly respects the religious nature of our people and accommodates the public service to their religious needs. At the same time, he coupled this with a statement of the state's neutrality towards the individual religious sects. What kind of pluralism is consistent with the affirmation of the religious character of the society? The American sociologist Robert Bellah, in his essay Civil Religion in America, delineates the religious ethos of America by referring to the open references to God made by presidents of various religious denominations. They refer to the deity of biblical teaching without any sectarian identification other than a neutral monotheism. Professor Robert P. George is one who in private conversation, if not in printed word, which I have not noticed, has referred to the American ethos as one of ethical monotheism. In two recent judgments of the American Supreme Court, in relation to the public display in courthouses of the Ten Commandments, we find elaborate references to the extent of public, presidential, and official references to God. In a dissenting judgment, Justice Antonin Scalia, himself a religious Christian, goes so far as to say that the Thanksgiving proclamation issued by George Washington at the instance of the first Congress was scrupulously non-denominational, but it was monotheistic. All of the actions of Washington and the first Congress upon which I have relied, virtually all Thanksgiving proclamations throughout our history, and all the other examples of our governments favoring religion that I have cited have invoked God, but not the founder of Christianity. There you go. In short, there is very strong reason to say that the significance of the attitude of the American Constitution towards the competition of the sects is not at all to relativize religion, but rather to elicit the common denominator of the American civil religion, namely an ethical monotheism of biblical origins. Beautiful. Two more points should here be made. One is that the non-denominationality of American life has generally not tended towards elements which undo the religious values of the society, and that such initiatives are the exception more than the rule. The second point is that the values, or as it tends to be put, the rights upheld in American society are expressed not in terms of an abstract or purely natural justice, but as rooted in God. Or as President J.F. Kennedy stated in his inaugural address, in terms of the belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. The elements of a monotheistic belief of biblical, Sinaitic origin, from which moral principles derive, serve as a very significant preparation for the conscious acceptance and study of the Noahide laws favored by the above-cited congressional resolution of 1991. And we quote, "These ethical values and principles," talking about the 7 Noahide commandments, "have been the bedrock of society from the dawn of civilization when they were known as the 7 Noahide laws. It remains for all national societies to examine the religious dimensions of their own national ethos. The facts appear to be that humanity overwhelmingly believes in God and can resonate with fundamental Noahide concepts, and that where a stringent atheist minority, often associated with a section of the universities, professes differently, this itself has to do with a taboo on the personal experience of religious faith. Alternatively, it is a secular humanism which has forgotten its religious roots." So it would be nice if the land of Israel would be as religious, the government, as the United States. And oftentimes when you hear the prime minister or whoever is representing or whoever is speaking from the government, hearing them speak and compare that to the president of the United States or to others and see how many times does each one mention God. As a Jew, it's kind of sad. Okay, so basically the point made is that the world is really ready and ripe to accept the Noahide commandments. And it's not that we need to re-educate and to make a major change. It's simply to explain to everybody the truth that they themselves really hold in very general terms. Obviously, there's several million people that believe this wrong thing, and then other millions that believe that wrong thing. But we're saying basically, monotheistically speaking, believing in one God, that he is the creator, and that he revealed himself at Sinai and gave the Torah and gave the 7 Noahide commandments. So that's the argument that he wants to make over here. Any questions, comments, or anything?
I thought it was interesting, the last sentence in this part speaks of the secular humanism which has forgotten its religious roots. Gives the impression that, I mean, even the secular humanists had to have gotten their ethos from somewhere.
Let's read footnote 12. Professor Ram Kenine, professor of social work at the University of Pennsylvania, has observed to me that even the positive, social, benevolent values of secular humanists thinking clearly come from religious traditions. That's what that professor. Now it's interesting. Look at footnote 11. Okay, he's quoting from some English journal, British Journal of Psychiatry in 1994. The great taboo at the end of the start of this century, I mean the 20th century, was sex. And you couldn't say that word even. And you couldn't talk about it. But it is now the last resort of the burnt out comedian. The unspeakable in the middle of the country was death. He didn't talk about death. And now teaching about bereavement has come back into undergraduate medical education. So it's not just very technical, we're biologists or we're doctors. No, but they're giving them the how to deal with it on an emotional level and so forth. What is unmentionable at the end of the century is personal experience of religious faith. That's what today is taboo. That you can't talk about. And well, of course, that's going to change, hopefully, very, very soon, if not already. It's just interesting. No one has anything to say? Who?
James Gosnell.
James, please.
Hi, Rabbi Turn. Thank you. This is a very interesting topic to me. My ancestors were here before the United States was founded, and I'm very into United States history, but also the times of the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, of course, and he seems to talk about deism in the Tanya. In other words, people believe that God is over there and we are now over here. And a lot of the founding fathers of the United States were deists and into, well, not all of them, but a lot of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. And while it laid a good a framework for our government, the Alter Rebbe kind of talks about this deism that they believed as well. And what are your thoughts? And you don't have to talk about it now, maybe at the end of the class, but can you teach us a bit, if you know, about like what was going on in the world of the Alter Rebbe when it came to the Enlightenment, or maybe if there's a Yiddish or Jewish word for what was going on in the Jewish world at that time when it came to like Western Europe and the Jews and of Western Europe and what was going on in the Jewish world.
It actually, his grandson, known as the Tzemach Tzedek, so he was fighting the Enlightenment, the Haskalah movement, as it was developing and it was catching on. So he dealt a lot with that. Actually, there was a famous meeting that went on that a whole bunch of rabbis got together, and they actually traveled to the big city, to Petersburg at the time. This was around 1840 or so, early 1840s, and it's actually translated in English also. It's called the Tzemach Tzedek and I think the Enlightenment movement. And the Alter Rebbe, his grandfather, you mentioned, so in the Tanya, of course, is where it describes the belief in the one God, but he starts off, maybe that's what you're referring to, asking the question, because the verse that he quotes right at the beginning of a certain section of the gate of unity and belief, that the verse says that you should know this day and take it to heart that God is the one and only God, and there's in the heavens and in the earth and beneath in the water. It says, who's going to think that there is some other God who's hidden in the deep depths of the ocean? What kind of ridiculous thing is that? And then he goes into his whole explanation, 12 chapters, explaining what it really means that there is only God and God alone, and that the entire existence of everything is completely not only dependent on God and is being recreated every second, but in truth, doesn't really exist. It's just that this is the will of God, and then he develops that whole idea. There are letters, I don't know too much about it offhand, but there are letters between George Washington to the Jewish people. There's some communication, there's some letters that he's writing, something about religion. He's writing to Jews, but maybe some of you know more details.
I'll have to look that up. I appreciate that.
Aaron,
Yeah, I was okay. I'm thinking about the Haskalah movement and what I read about it. I think once, Rabbi, you said that a Jew can contaminate the environment as well as bless the environment. So this Haskalah movement bred men like Karl Marx, who was Jewish, bred men like what's his name, Sigmund Freud, and all of these different people. And a lot of people at those universities proceeded to create a lot of ferment, and they literally caused the Bolshevik Revolution. So
Okay.
I'm wondering. I don't think the rabbis back then were trying. I mean, they weren't working with them at all. Did they see this coming?
I think so. I think if you read that, what I referenced of the Tzemach Tzedek and the Haskalah movement, yes, they did. And that's why at the time, not all rabbis appreciated the hard line that the Tzemach Tzedek and another one of the great rabbis then was Rabbi Yitzchak of Volozhiner, who was not a Chassid, and the Tzemach Tzedek and him were on the same team, so to say, and they were fighting very, very strongly against what the Haskalah movement was trying to get the government to do, and just introduce secular studies to force it into the Jewish private school systems. And they saw the writing on the wall. They saw what was going on over here, and therefore they did not want to allow it at all. And the Tzemach Tzedek, actually, we have the details of it historically, and he was actually arrested some 23 times during that course of those weeks that they were in Petersburg. It was house arrest, 23 times for standing up against the government. And when asked, isn't this mutiny? Aren't you rebelling against the government? And we know that by Jewish law, someone who rebels against the government, so that Tzemach Tzedek answered that I may be rebelling against the government, and the penalty might be capital punishment. However, to rebel against the real king, the heavenly court, then the person is liable to death by soul, not just by body. So you tell me which is worse. That's how so it was that they did see what was coming, and then from the Enlightenment movement, then developed what's referred to as Reform Judaism, which became very, very popular. And that's a whole historic piece. And that went so far that then you had another movement that came as sort of as a response to that. They called themselves conservative, as relative to how far out the reform was. So then you have conservative, which is also not kosher Judaism. It's not authentic and proper, but they just felt that the reform went too far. And it seems like now, thank God, both of those are really pretty much on the way to becoming bankrupt. The main place which of the movement, it was in Cincinnati, Ohio. The Jewish theological seminary, and that recently, it was in the past couple of years, they closed down their rabbinic school, and a lot of the, whatever you want to call their places of their synagogues or temples, whatever they're called, have merged together and have closed down. You see it all over the place. Sure, in the United States, I'm not sure what's going on in other countries, but they're just, closing down because I would say it's because we're in the Messianic era, and we're getting to the truth, and therefore people don't want to live these lies any longer, and they want, or they feel the need for the absolute truth.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive.
Anyone else?
The challenge for a lot of this is that things seem like a good idea at the time, and people can't really think through where to go. It just seems like, a lot of the people that might be considered difficult in this chapter they view themselves as decent people,
right?
And the corruption that's occurring, they think it's the proper thing. They think that they're following some kind of moral code, and that's where it's really difficult to address it. That except for something like saying, okay, we're going to support the Torah, but yeah, that's part of the challenge, that they see themselves as good people.
Right. So the education is the answer. Teaching. What else can we do?
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously got to do start Rabbi at the childhood, at school, and then goes right to adult. From your children through to high school, teaching about the law and that. It's going to be part of the curriculum.
Yeah. So, the next part is where he's going to get into Israel and universal peace and how that plays into it. More so in part, we're up to section 2 on page 116, but mainly on page 123. If I'm not mistaken, we actually did it. We skipped 2 there because of what was going on in the world, in Israel especially. So we did this at the beginning of the current war. We skipped to page 123 and did it. Mm-hmm. But I think it's worthwhile to do it again. Number one, because some of us, myself included, may not remember all the points and the nuances. And I think we have enough new people that we can do it again. And for the rest that already did it, it'll be review. Okay, I just wanted to bring out one point before we finish for today. He brings down a couple of times in the footnote a specific commentary called the Kli Yakar, which is a well-known, accepted commentary on the Chumash, on the Bible. When he mentioned Shabbos, that the Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments and clearly not one of the 7, So he mentions in footnote 1 on page 106, and likewise page 122 in footnote 25. All right. Oh, there he says. Okay, in footnote 1, he tells us about this in chapter 6. So he referenced it several times. So at least 3 times here. He brings down very interestingly in page 122, footnote 25, that this commentary of the Kli Yakar explains on the verse in the 10 Commandments where it says, Zachar, remember the day of the Sabbath to keep it holy, sacred. So he says that aspect of remembrance pertains to all humanity, inasmuch as the Sabbath signifies recognition of the Creator and the act of creation. It's not that we're telling non-Jews to keep the Sabbath, but the remembrance of it pertains to everybody. In other words, according to the Kli Yakar, even the Sabbath of the 10 Commandments is related to, and not that it applies in the technical sense of what you can't do, but it's not like, oh, it has nothing to do with them. It's a gift that God gave to the Jewish people, and it has nothing to do with them, and we wish you guys wouldn't even know about the Sabbath. No, that's not it. No. Okay, but more about that when we get to that. All right, so we have to remember that next week, we're looking at, we are currently up to page 116, World Society and the Noahide laws. All right. All the best to everybody. Stay well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Right there.